If it matters to moms, it matters to us. And we have a gentleman with us today as our guest. Welcome to Moms Matters. I'm Patti Milne. My co-host Bobbie Jager is here with me today, as we often are. Sometimes we're doing this on our own with our guests. We also have a special guest today who's going to talk about some really, really exciting things going on in the education world, something very unique. James Loftus. And James, you've been on our show previously a few months ago. And gosh, we're getting to the end of the year, and we've been thinking so much about the year wrapping up. But you have a lot of great opportunities in the things that you're involved in, which includes I want to make sure I get this accurately, jplmuseum.org and the Rural Schools Education Initiative. So
that's a mouthful.
It is a tongue twister.
I don't want to say anything else. I want you to just bring us up to date on what's happening in your world with these two endeavors and the opportunities. You caught me recently and said, "No, and I said, "Well, you need to come and talk."
Tell us what it all means first, what that stands for.
Well, thank you. JPL Museum stands for Joseph Philip Loftus. He was my father. He retired as the Assistant Director of NASA at Johnson Space Center after a career 45 years on his retirement certificate. But when you look on the flag that was flown to the moon, they gave him his U.S. Air Force time as well. So it's a 47-year career in the space industry. And he was the chief technical planner for the Apollo missions, retired as the assistant director in charge of life sciences. And so we created a museum in 2015 to honor his career. And the focus was a mobile museum where we actually brought resources out into the community. I actually have a micro museum. It's inside of the Gardner House Cafe and Bed and Breakfast, which is located at 633 North 3rd Avenue in Staten, Oregon. And I'd like to first of all stop and say thank you guys for having me back. We've had an incredible year. I want to thank Pacific Power and their foundation for helping us, and Hilliard's Mid-City Ford for providing transportation, because we covered 1,900 miles in 14 days, talked to 1,600 high school students and adults. We were in the Willamette Valley. We were at the Staten High School, Jefferson High School, Shamawa Indian School, the Village Homeschool Group, which actually bussed in about 45 kids from students from Beaverton. So cool. And they had some of the most interesting questions out of all the groups. It's amazing. We even got onto Kingsley Air Base in Klamath Falls, and that was kind of an interesting process, because the local senator, Dennis Lithicum, suggested that.
I love him.
He's a great guy.
You get my vote. He's awesome.
He's a great guy.
The man.
He goes, you need to go to Kingsley Air Base. And I'm thinking, well, I don't want to ask him, how do I do that?
Yeah.
And so I end up calling the judge advocate's office and sending them an email. And about 4 hours later, I get this response from this colonel. And he goes, "Mr. Loftus, we can't find this Rural Schools Education Initiative. What federal program is this out of?" And I said, "It's a private program." And he goes, "Oh, thank God."
We haven't lost anything. This is good.
Okay, so tell me about what you do. And so I shared with him what we were doing, and we had just gotten done with the Shamawa Indian School, where we had spent 3 hours with these students. And let me tell you, these students, they, after the presentation, they came up and they asked some incredible questions.
That's so cool.
And it wasn't like questions like, what does it take to put a man on the moon? It was, what does it take for me to go to college? What does it take for me to fulfill my vision, my dream? And I got stopped as I was loading some stuff up to the van, and this student, I think he was a freshman or sophomore, he was very young. He asked me, he goes, I've never been in this position. My family is from, New Mexico, and I'm the first person to actually go to this kind of school, and I want to go to college. How do I go to college? And I looked at him and I said, you need to learn. You need to learn how to learn. Don't rely on your teacher. Rely on yourself. And then if you can't figure it out, go to your teacher and ask him. And then you'll find that it's not a problem when somebody says, can you do that? You can say, well, let me figure it out first before you say yes. But the answer should be, let me look at it before you say, no, I can't do that. And because we're the only ones that set our obstacles in front of us. We're the only ones that say, oh, I can't do that. I won't do that. It's too hard. And so, you know, that was kind of the main theme of what we were trying to show these students. Norman Chaffee, he's 83 years old. He's kind of hunched over. He looks like Yoda. A lot of the students refer to him as Yoda.
That's great.
Oh, it's hilarious. He actually has in Houston his own parking space at this school that says Yoda's parking only.
I love it.
And I set up the conversation with a very uncomfortable question. Why am I here?
Meaning you or meaning the student?
Meaning, why am I here? What is my purpose? Why am I here? And it's amazing, the responses that you get from these students. And I think probably the most accurate one came from this developmentally challenged child. He's in a wheelchair, he can hardly speak, and he goes, I don't know. And I'm thinking, yes, you got the answer right. We don't know why we're here. It's a rhetorical question that I open up the conversation with because I want them to think. I want them to look internally. Why am I here? What am I supposed to get out of this presentation? And then I go on to share that, you know, I'm a person that I observe people. You know, when I go to the mall or I'm shopping or I do things, I look at people. And I've noticed there's really only two types of people, those that look down when they walk and those that look up.
That's right.
And when they look up, they look you in the eyes, they smile, you know, some of them might...
They engage.
Yes. Yes. And so those are the people that see the beauty of life. And so I point out that, you know, while Norm is hunched over and he has to look down to keep from falling down, he put a man on the moon. He put a robot.
He was looking up.
That's right.
Way before these kids were born.
That's right. And so it gets these kids to start to think about, you know, what are my goals? What are my visions? And so then Norm has his presentation where he talks about, you know, hey, I was in the chemical and oil business, and they announced that they're going to try to put a man on the moon, and I said, I like Houston. I want to go there. They got crawfish and seafood, good weather.
Sign me up.
Right. But he also talks about, you know, how as a child, when he was given a chemistry set, he was fascinated with, you could take one chemical and you could take another chemical, and you add the two chemicals together and you get a third element. And, you know, in that process, he destroyed the kitchen curtains and, you know, had to repaint the kitchen ceiling. But it was that process of experimentation and inquisitive nature that all of us as children have. Even me as an adult, I'm still very much an inquisitive person. And so we focus on trying to inspire those students to understand that the only person that can be the obstacle to their dreams is themselves. That's number one. Number two, I teach them that, or I try to share with them, that if you have an idea, it's just an idea. If you don't put it down on paper, it can't become a plan. And if you have a plan for your future, what you want to do, you need to write it down. You need to set benchmarks. You need to set goals. You may not have all the answers, and you might take it to somebody and share it with them, and they go, oh, that's crazy. You can't do that. Well, you know, you can choose to listen to that person, or you can take it back and go over here and say, hey, you're an expert in this area. Can you look at this? And they go, you know, that's this, I can look at this. I can take this portion of it, and I can help you.
Okay, I'm going to stop you for just a second.
Yes.
Wait till you take a break. This is so interesting. I didn't even know we were out of time. Thanks. We'll be right back.
Happy birthday!
Thank you, dear, very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You make me feel so young. You make me feel so spring has sprung. And every time I see you,
You're not fooling anybody you know. Think young. Pass it on.
the moment that you speak.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Welcome back to Moms Matters, and I am so excited about what we're talking about. We got way over, and it's just fun. We have James Loftus here, and we're talking about education, so you know that's right up my alley, and I love it. But I'm just going to let you take off again, recap what you closed with, and let's see where you're going and what you want to do and how we can help.
Well, thank you very much. I want to share one last story before I go into where we're headed. I knew our mission had been completed when we went to Hensley High School in Klamath Falls, because the teacher, she's actually a professor, PhD, Miss Lebowski, comes running out and gives Norman Chaffee a hug and said, I had a student that was going to drop out of my aerospace engineering course. She's a sophomore. She's one of the brightest students in the school. And she has changed her life because she had this chance to meet you, have the understanding that just because she's struggling right now doesn't mean it will be a struggle in the future. And so the other last thing I'll share is the students that surrounded us after we were finished making the presentation were the students that I saw the most ignition of a spark of life and inquisitive nature, and downright they didn't want to be held back, and so there was a lot of times when we stayed afterwards so that those students would have that additional time with Norm. And I'll send you the link to an interview that the Medford, I think it was NBC or Fox, did with a student. And the student comes out and he's interviewed and he goes, you know, what Norm had to say was very interesting, but it's what Mr. Loftus had to say that changed my life. That it gives me encouragement to know that I can be a part of this program, that in 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I can actually assist putting a man onto the moon or onto Mars or onto the base, or I can actually be a part of it myself. So that kind of sums up what we've accomplished over the last 2 or 3 weeks in October. We've been asked to apply for a grant from Pacific Power Foundation for their upcoming cycle in March. It's an educational grant. We're tempted to partner with Atlantis Education Services in Kennedy Space Center. They're a bona fide certified contractor, and we have 14 students that have already signed up to go to Kennedy Space Center. They're out of Medford. Well, I'd like to see if we can do something here in the Willamette Valley. Something closer to home. You know, last year it was kind of chaotic. It was our first year of really trying to do outreach. So we ended up fielding some students that were from Umatilla, Medford, and 7 out of Bend to the International Space Design Settlement Competition. This March in the Museum of Flight in Seattle, there's an opportunity for schools to participate in this.
How do the schools get that information?
If they will contact me via email, I will get them in contact with Anita Gale. She's a former Boeing executive. She is big on education. They've been doing this for 25 years, but this is the second year that they're hosting it in the Pacific Northwest. And so there's ways for schools to put together a team. There's ways for students to do an online version, and then they can go and do this regional competition. If they qualify at the regional competition, they get to go to Kennedy Space Center for the International World Championship, where they will compete with students from all over the world. They'll be judged by astronauts. And I'll give you an example. Anthony Abira from Umatilla was tasked with being on the Australian team. And so when they get there, there's about 400 students, and they're broken up into different companies. So you might have 10 kids from China, 5 kids from India, 3 kids from the Americas, a couple from South America and Canada, and that makes up the core team. And so they have to write a business plan. It has to be based on actual physics, on how you're going to, I think this year they're going to do a low orbiting platform outside of the lunar surface, where they have to compete with, I think, you know, having 15,000 people in this space station. How do you feed them? How do you entertain them? What's your national anthem? You know, what kind of flag are you going to have? There's all these different things that go into these competitions.
I love it.
And
Isn't
they have
that
3
fun?
days.
Yeah.
3 days to go through this. They're sleep deprived.
Of course.
They're camping out underneath space artifacts in the different competitions. And we try to keep the cost down to a couple $100s per student, and that's basically to pay for the printing material. Obviously, they have to pay for hotel, or if we, like with what we do at Johnson Space Center, they actually camp out in the visitor center. So then the cost goes way down. So I haven't got all the details yet, but it will be in March of this year.
Love it.
And I've actually been asked to go to Johnson Space Center to act as an observer, as somebody that can
Good
then
for
bring
you.
this back and
Yes,
coordinate
yes.
with the different schools, homeschooling groups.
Love it.
Anyone
Right
is
up my alley.
anyone is welcome to participate in this activity. At the same time, I'm working with them to perhaps bring some of the. They have a unique robotics kit. It's a low-cost kit, and maybe we can bring that here to Oregon, where there's a course similar to your Legos course, but it's not as expensive, and it's much more versatile. That's one thing. The other thing is we're looking at trying to perhaps bring up somebody who can then launch like an Estes rocket, so we can go through, you know, you'd be on a football
Amazing.
field.
Yeah.
You talk about, you know, all the different things of your angular momentum, you know, how much your velocity is, how high, what your wind speed are.
Right.
And so you want to be able to recover it. They have another competition where they actually launch 1 pound, 1 mile. And then they have another one that you actually have to go to White Sands, New Mexico.
I've been there. I'm excited because I know exactly what you're talking
It's
about.
20 pounds, 20 miles. And if you go
so
21 miles, you lose. If you go 19 miles, you lose. It's
lose.
20 pounds, 20 miles. And they actually have to get special FAA clearance to clear the airspace to launch this stuff. And so there's all these different activities,
love it.
and there's all these
Yes.
different opportunities, but there's no one that's actually trying to coordinate it. And the way I look at this is that there's an ocean of resources just sitting there at Johnson Space Center. And we, as a community, as a state, as Republicans and Democrats, independents and liberals, we should look at trying to build a pipeline that brings those resources here.
Right.
Yes.
We are pioneers. Oregon is a pioneering state, and I am suggesting that we get over any obstacles that we have and we look at pioneering the next
Making it better.
generation of aerospace engineers.
I agree.
Oh,
I'm going to
that's-
stop you for 1 second. Will you give your email, how they get in touch with you? You mentioned that's how they would. Can you say it really carefully?
Sure, it's James.Loftus, L-O-F as in Frank, T as in Tom, U.S. as in United States, at jplmuseum.org.
Okay.
Good. And before we close the show, you'll have another opportunity to repeat that
Good enough.
information.
Good.
If any of our viewers just didn't quite get the whole thing, you'll give that again. But yeah, these opportunities that you're talking about, it's what kids need. Yeah, ignite that fire. Too many kids just have not been exposed to other opportunities like this, and they don't come around that often, so that's why it's important to get your message out.
Well, if
I
you
love
can just imagine a kid coming from Sublimity, Oregon, and reminding them that Orville and Wilbur Wright grew up in Sublimity, Oregon.
Correct.
Okay, and that they went on to, Ohio and then to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, but there's roots right back in here to the early days of flight, and that the astronauts trained here in Oregon, all of them. And that was one of the things that I was amazed that the janitor came up to me at Central Union Bend High School and said, I met all of the astronauts back in the 60s.
Oh, yeah.
And he was kind of embarrassed that he was the janitor. And I shared a story with him about Scott Carpenter inspecting the shuttle assembly facility. And he comes up to the janitor and he goes, "What are you doing?"
I'm going to ask you to hold that thought, and as soon as we come back, share the story.
That's right. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
kindness. Pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
Welcome back to Moms Matters, and this is so exciting to have James Loftus with us talking about his fantastic program and getting kids ignited in all the opportunities with space things and whatnot. You were telling a story, James, about a janitor, and we had to hold the thought while we took a quick break. So tell the janitor story.
Okay, so we're at the Bend Central High School, and the janitor comes up, and he's sharing with me that he went to high school there when all the astronauts in the 60s were out there at Obsidian Lake testing for the Apollo missions, and that it was a highlight of his life. And I asked him, well, what do you do? And he kind of humbly says, I'm the janitor. And I looked at him and I said, you know, that's a great job. And I said, you know, imagine if the trash cans weren't empty. Imagine if this were happening. Imagine this. And I said, let me share a story about Scott Carpenter. He's in the shuttle assembly facility, and he walks up to a guy and he's sweeping the floors, and he goes, what do you do here? And he goes, I'm helping to build the shuttle. And Scott thought about that for a minute, and he goes, you know, he is. Because if there's any debris in that assembly process that could impact their mission.
Yeah, you bet.
So it really made it hit home for me that it doesn't matter what your position is, as long as you're playing as part of that team, you're helping everyone accomplish what they need to do. In his case, he was supporting hundreds of students, and he didn't look at it like that until I showed him. And so his perspective kind of brightened. He was like, you know, I have an important job.
They do, and I think sometimes we lose focus of that, right? Because
it's
the behind
mundane.
the
You do it
scenes.
every day, it's mundane. So, you know, if you get reignited in that position,
Yes.
you know, it's one of the things that I'm working on. I really don't know how this process is going to work. I've been told it's going to take up to 3 years. And that is that there is one last full-size shuttle simulator. It's called the CCT-2. It weighs over 90,000 pounds.
Ooh.
It will cost, on best guess estimate, $1.75 million just to move it. It's 27 feet tall on a double drop-down axle trailer. It cannot pass under any bridge in the United States.
Oh,
And
wow.
it turns out that there's a facility here in Oregon that may be eligible to where this thing could be moved to, and that's in McMinnville, Oregon.
Woohoo, my hometown.
They have an airport that has a runway long enough to land the guppy. So in my opinion, this is going to take a lot of people, a lot of organizations that have vision, because it's a tourist attraction, number one.
Yep.
It's an educational tool, number two, and I would actually put it as an educational tool first.
Yeah.
And then as a cultural tourism draw second.
Cultural, yeah.
But they back each other, right? Because you're educating the community and you're educating kids.
And how many people wouldn't mind getting in the shuttle and trying to launch it, fly it,
Wouldn't that
and
be
land
fun?
it? Because this does full 360-degree articulation with simulations for launch.
Oh, man.
It's what the astronauts used. There's only one left, and it's in Building 9 in Houston, and it's going to be up for disposal. And we have actually started the process of making a request as to how do we participate in this. So I would hope that Oregon would see the value of trying to come together as a community, as a state, and try to make that happen. How do we make that happen? I do not know yet. I'm still kind of learning the ropes. I'm very new at how do you get something that's worth $50 million for 1.75.
Good shopping skills. Good shopping skills. Talk to me after the
What
show.
percentage is that?
Yeah, it's just, you know, I need help.
Yeah.
You know, you ask, can I use volunteers? I could use a volunteer for social media. I could use a volunteer for website. I could use all sorts of volunteers, you know.
To help out.
And helping me manage. Right now I have, he's a volunteer kind of administrative assistant that's been helping me for the last couple of months. He's been very helpful in trying to help me coordinate all the different activities.
Yeah.
But it's been, you know, for 3 years, a one-man band. And I'm grateful for, again, Pacific Power this year has been a phenomenal supporter. Hilliers, Mid-City Ford, without their transportation, I couldn't have covered the 1,900 miles. The Santiam Hospital was as a huge contributor to making it available for the Willamette Valley. And I'm grateful that, you know, when we called the schools, you would be surprised at how much suspicion there is.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
You know, what do you
Yeah.
mean?
That's so
You want to come to
sad.
our school? And
You want to help?
So, yeah.
Wait, that's just not heard of.
But you know,
Well,
it's,
what does
well,
it
wait
cost?
a minute. Yes, but wait a minute. How is this going to fit in with what our teacher's day is so full already? And you know, instead of looking at the bigger picture and what you can bring to those students, it's about the students. It's not about the school.
Wait, say that again. It's
about the students.
Whoa.
Imagine that.
What a novel idea.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But anyway,
that
so
drives me crazy.
it's just amazing that suspicion would be there. It shouldn't. It just shouldn't be there
It's
at all.
just-
Well, it is something that I've had to overcome, and you know, I looked at it as an obstacle.
It was.
I had problems with media, and I couldn't get the local newspaper to do an article. I couldn't get the local television to do an article.
Yeah.
I looked at it as an obstacle, and do I want to spend my time on that obstacle?
Right.
No.
Or do I want to spend my time
move
on the
on.
kids?
Yes.
Right.
My kids,
Yeah.
the kids are the focus. So,
Yep.
you know, I can try to spend 2 hours trying to get somebody to report on this. And what was amazing is that once we got the ball rolling,
They find you.
I went to the principals or the superintendents and said, you know, you're missing a huge opportunity if you have any relations with the local media. And boy, they were down there, and the media, they were like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to meet my hero. So, you know, that was able to work itself out, but I had to make a decision. Do I want to focus on this obstacle or not making an obstacle by just simply removing it from my vision? My vision are the students. How do I maximize the time that I have with the students and Norm's schedule and not burn him out?
Okay. Yeah. Wind it up.
All right.
Tell
so
everybody what you need, how we can help.
I could use social media students that are interested in space or rocketry or robotics to help me with my Facebook and social media page. I obviously can use funding. You can go to our website and take a look at that. But I'm more interested in trying to reach out. On Mondays, I've allocated several hours that I can go out into the Willamette Valley from Portland to Eugene and spend time with students. I bring space artifacts with me. I tell some stories. I've got Phil, he's number 174, Project Mercury chimps. He was also part of the Great Escape. So I bring him with me. And I tell stories.
So to get in front of students, you need any school personnel, parents, or any interested people to contact you
Yes.
and say, we want to bring this to our local school. So give real quickly, again, your contact information, and it will be on the bottom of the screen.
It's James Loftus, James.Loftus, Loftus, at jplmuseum.org. I'll give you the other one. It's wbcable.net. It's James.Loftus as well. And my phone number is 503-602-9128. And if it's a student, a teacher, a grandparent, principal, anyone.
Business person?
I was out at Morningside Elementary a couple of months ago, and I went to 3 different 3rd and 4th grader classes, all because one grandparent called me up and said, you know, my daughter teaches there, and would you go there? And I said, that's our mission.
So please, anybody listening, and if you are interested in any way, shape, or form, you have young people interested in this kind of activity, get in touch with James. And thank you again so much
thank
for
you so
being
much.
here to update us on this great endeavor that you have.
Thank you.
My fire is lit.
Yes.
Well, let's just keep it ignited. So.
Okay.
Well, thank you.